Playing the same piece on different instruments can have a dramatically different effect and even change the meaning of the piece. But how big of a difference does it actually make? Well, in today's video, I'm going to react to the piece 433 by John Cage, firstly arranged for piano, then arranged for orchestra, and then arranged for orchestra with a soloist. So first up, we have a piano arrangement played by William Marks. So let's get into it. I actually think he's rushing just a little bit here. That slight crescendo that the audience member just put into the music, I probably would have waited until the third movement to do that, because then it's going to be more powerful and explosive. Interesting. So the first movement actually isn't that long. Now, typically in a piece that has 3 movements, it's normally in sonata form, and in sonata form, you get 2 different ideas. So you get like one melodic idea and then another melodic idea that can be used later on in the piece. But because this movement is only 33 seconds, obviously only one idea is used. Now, normally, between movements, if you're playing a piano piece anyway, it's important to, like, take a little bit of time. What I see a lot of the time is someone finishing the first movement really quickly, and they're kind of so panicked to get into the second movement and keep going. Whereas pieces that are in separate movements, usually you need to breathe between the movements, so you can kind of get rid of the feeling that was created from the first movement and start afresh with the second movement. Yeah, interesting. So normally in second movements are usually a lot more calmer and stiller than first movements. And that is kind of proven to be the case in this piece. Typically, you get a first movement, which kind of states the themes, as I said before, and there's often a lot more movement in the piece. But then in the second movement, you get a much calmer movement. So there's a lot less happening. It's often a lot slower. And as you can probably tell, I mean, the movement feels slower to me. Yeah, I really like how kind of tranquil the movement is. Before we move on to the orchestral arrangement, I'm just interested to see how he treats the finale of this. Yeah, interesting. So it was actually a much calmer finish to a piece than I would expect. Once again, often in pieces that have 3 movements, in the final movement, you get kind of a big finish. But he actually seemed quite calm towards the end of the piece. So that's a piano arrangement of 433 by John Cage. But obviously, when you play something on the piano, it's going to sound very different to if you play something for orchestra. And in 2020, the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra did a recording of this piece. So let's see if it does, in fact, sound different. Wow, interesting. So the first movement this time, it did actually feel a lot more still, but I think that's because of the reverb of the room, like dispersing the sound. You can tell that the music has a much warmer quality because it's been dispersed around a much larger room. In the piano arrangement of this piece, it did feel a little bit more intense because it's just you and the player kind of sharing the music. Whereas for orchestra, the first movement did sound a little bit more passive. Yeah, you can tell that the conductor absolutely loves this piece. I mean, his face, you can see he's kind of very emotional. That actually felt really short for the second movement. To me, the first and second movement in the orchestral version had much less difference between them than in the piano version. In the piano version, you could definitely tell that the first movement, I mean, it had that crescendo in the middle of it, but then the second movement was much more still. But maybe because for orchestra, it's in a much larger room and sound is being dispersed, there's much less difference between the two movements. Wow, you can really see how much this piece means to the conductor. Yeah, I mean, excellently played. I actually don't think I even heard a wrong note in there. So that's how it sounds for orchestra, and it is very different to the piano version. But what happens if you kind of combine the two, where you have a soloist and an orchestra? Well, in 2017, RC Chamber Orchestra did exactly that. So it looks like the soloist is an oboe player. Wow, really interesting. For the first movement there, the conductor opened that with quite the forceful movement. It kind of suggests that he wants the first movement to be played with much more vigor than the other orchestra and the pianist did. That's kind of an interesting interpretation. Wow, is he just going straight into the second movement there? I've got to say, in this particular version of the piece, it does sound like there is a lot more sort of ambient noise. And it's really hard to tell whether that's the recording conditions or whether that's, you know, in the piece. But I do think it makes the music sound a lot more present. Whereas in the previous orchestral version, everything sounded kind of calm and still and tranquil. In this version of it, it's kind of putting me on the edge of my seat. Like, I want to know what's going to happen next in the music. Oh, interesting. Maybe that wasn't the start of the second movement. Maybe the conductor was just bringing some other instruments in for the final part of that first movement. Kind of interesting that the percussionist here is playing the timpanis rather than another percussion instrument, and also the fact that this orchestra includes a piano. I mean, obviously, being a pianist, anything that involves a piano is going to sound much better than just an orchestra by itself. But I've got to say, in this particular piece, it really does sound like the piano is kind of fading into the background. I think it's going to be really hard being a soloist in this situation. I mean, it's hard playing a concerto or being a soloist in front of any orchestra, but especially in a piece where you are so exposed, any wrong notes that you play is going to be heard. Yeah, once again, very well played. So it's really interesting because to me, the piano version and the version with the soloist were much more present arrangements. They made me feel much more alert, and like there was much more nuance going on. Whereas in the orchestral version, it did feel very still. And it's interesting because before I started recording this video, I did actually have a go at playing this myself. And I actually found it very hard to play through the entire piece, although I did manage to get through the first movement. And for anyone learning the piano, the first movement of this is a really great piece to kind of learn first, because you can start practicing and learning the first movement of this piece before you even get the piano. But if you tried playing 433, let me know in the comments. And if you want to see me comparing 3 pianists playing La Campanella, then head on through and I will see you there.